Okay. So hopefully, you all can see us and hear us. Like, you can give me that would be helpful.
Caroline, can you try turning off your F5?
Am I really choppy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like it's going to fall to somebody else to
give me a second. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint and I'll share. Oh, are you all having trouble hearing me, or am I coming through? Okay.
No, you're good.
I'm good. All right. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. Right. All right, can y'all see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, Caroline, do you want to try turning off your video? See if that helps on your end.
And
yeah, let me try that.
And maybe if everybody could mute if we're not talking, because I can hear feedback. I don't know if other people can.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks,
that would be really
Melissa.
helpful. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep, much better.
Okay. Just stop me if at some point you can't hear me. So thanks everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. This is our 4th session. Brandy is recording this for us, so just you know, so everyone's aware this is being recorded and it's available after. It'll be available after the meeting for anyone that wants to or not able to attend. We want to today. We're recapping. We started our discussion about complex case weighting at our November meeting, but we've now had a couple months off. We've had the holidays, so we're sort of regrouping in this. You know, hopefully, you know, we're off to a happy 2022 so far. I know it's been kind of crazy between weather and the new Omicron variant. Everybody's doing the best they can to, you know, to continue working, and you know, a lot of people have responsibilities for their kids, and I know there's issues with schools, lots of stuff going on. So we wanted to sort of start this meeting by recapping what we went over in terms of the complex case weighting. Really, it's what our current reporting trends show. You know, Gloria went over that with all of us in the November meeting, but if anybody wasn't at that meeting, this will be new for you. Otherwise, it'll be a recap. I think it'll be a helpful way for us to get started back into this conversation. We want to talk about the current challenges, and if you were able to see the agenda that I sent out yesterday, and again, my apologies for not getting that out sooner. I did list those in there just so that you could sort of be prepared for what we were going to take a look at today. What I really want to focus most of this meeting on is potential recommendations, because that's really what we want, right? Is how do we appropriately weight cases so that you all are being appropriately compensated, or at least the best we can, for the hard work that you do, without anybody spending too much time doing that. And so I think when we get to the challenges and then potential recommendations, I think you'll see some similarities in, you know, in the challenges as to why, you know, it's important that we come up with something we can all work with. So I'm going to turn it over to Gloria to go over what the trends are, the reporting trends are showing as far as complex cases.
Thanks. So I think I have 3 different charts for us to look at, and this will look familiar for those of you who are able to make the last meeting. But essentially what I did is I took The PCRP reports from July 2020 through June 2021. I realize this is a little bit dated at this point, but that was the data that I had available at the time that I pulled this analysis together. So it's a year's worth of data looking at the use of any kind of case complexity and how that's broken out by county. So that's what we're looking at right now. So this shows each PCRP county, and I guess just to note for our 4 newest counties, this data will just be from January through June 2021, so it's a shorter window. But we're looking over the reporting period, what proportion of cases were indicated to be any kind of complex factor by county. So at the very bottom, we can see all counties overall are reporting 5% of cases to be complex. And this varies a lot by counties, with clearly Clatsop having the highest proportion of cases being indicated as complex, followed by Columbia and then Benton. And so some of the reasons why we see differences in complex indicators is because of the amount of attorneys we have covering out of county cases in different counties. So we know that for both Clatsop and Columbia and Benton too, many of our attorneys are working out of county cases regularly. And there's also a different way that we have family treatment court being counted as complex in Columbia. So that's part of why that county has a higher complex case percentage, which I think we discussed this last time. So, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is that the complex case factor is not distributed equally by county. It's clear when we look at who's working out of county cases why that is not necessarily distributed equally. But if we look closer at the types of complex factors, we see that different counties are also not using the collateral related legal needs category the same way. And so one of the questions I have when looking at that level of data is, are counties not using it the same way because they truly have different levels of case complexity in different counties, or just is it an error in reporting or a difference in reporting? So that's just something to keep in mind when we go into a conversation about challenges and recommendations. So if we can go to the next slide. This is looking at, again, this 1 year period, and all of the cases that were reported over this 12 months, and cases that were open for the 12-month period would be reported 12 times. So it's every case reported every month, just to understand the population we're looking at. And so this is the breakdown of which complex case types are used most often during this year. We can see that out of county is the most used complex case type, accounting for nearly 40% of complex cases. The as otherwise approved is about 1 in 5 complex cases. M11 is 15%, collateral related needs is about 10%, and then everything else is smaller proportion. So that's overall for all counties, how attorneys are using the complex case categories. And then the last slide for data is looking at the number of hours that attorneys are recording per case per month by whether or not the case is complex, and if it is complex by the complex case type. So I'm just going to give an example so we can all understand what this means. So on average, Attorneys who are indicating a case to be as otherwise approved by OPDS complex are spending 6 hours per case on a monthly basis. So 6 hours monthly on that type of complex case. So that's why it says all counties average 6 hours. For cases that are not indicated as complex, attorneys are spending on average 3 hours per month per non-complex case. And so we can see very clearly here that cases that are indicated as complex using the as otherwise approved by OPDS and the collateral related needs categories are actually spending double the amount of time on those kinds of complex cases than not complex case. And you can see I have this in like descending order, like what is the average amount of time spent on cases by the complexity factor. So the complex case types that have the most hours spent on them are the as otherwise approved, the collateral related needs as at 6 hours monthly, M11 not previously appointed on dependency cases average 5 hours per case on a monthly basis. Contested adoption and out of county are averaging 4 hours per case on a monthly basis. And the 3 or more felony petitions is 3 hours per case on a monthly basis. And one thing I want to note is that the out of county is averaging 4 hours per month, and that may not be true going forward if we ever live in a non-pandemic world. But this data is just reflecting times in which we may be doing more remote activities because of COVID. And Alan, I see your hand.
On what you just said about out of county, with them opening up now and reducing the distancing issues, we're spending a lot more time going from here to Corvallis from Lincoln. We have a significant presence in Benton County. So I have a hunch these numbers will significantly change in the next several reports, just whatever it's worth.
Thanks, Alan. So that's what I was getting at, is that you should approach the out of county hours with caution because of the time frame in which these reports are pulled. We would anticipate it would be more hours if things were not being conducted remotely. So that's all I have for you. And I think the takeaway for this slide is that some complex case types are really double the amount of hours or nearly double the amount of hours as a non-complex case, while some complex case types do not seem to be double the amount of hours. So may not warrant getting double the case count if we are to continue with our current process of counting complex cases as more than one case count. We might need to determine what the weighting should be based on the type of case complexity. So all of that is, I hope, helpful to the conversation that we'll have about current challenges and potential solutions. Gardner, I see your hand.
Hi, thanks. I just want to understand, is what you're saying is that there's a possibility that instead of having a broad single credit for how much a complex case is in the future, in other words, going up or going down for all of them, it may be more managed in a more granular manner. In other words, certain types of complex cases may be worth certain amount of credit. Is that what you're saying might be in the future?
So what I'm saying is that we should use this information in the conversation we'll have about what potential solutions there are to addressing our current complex case weighting system that may not, our current system doesn't seem to necessarily accurately reflect how much time people are really putting into cases. So I don't know if that's actually the like solution I want to propose, but I want you guys to be thinking about this going forward into a discussion about what could we do differently to better account for the time you all are spending on cases, complex or not complex.
Thank
And
you. I appreciate it.
yeah, sorry that wasn't super clear. Judah, I
Yeah.
saw your hand too. Do you have thoughts or feelings, questions?
Well, I was just thinking, is there a way to have, I saw Shannon smiling, like some kind of sliding on this? So for instance, me taking a case out of Polk County, that's a 25-minute drive, not a big deal. Me taking a case out of Multnomah County, round trip, that's over 5 hours to get to court. So is there a way that that these can be some kind of sliding thing between a 1.5 and say a 2 or something like that?
Yeah, so I think that all of these ideas are really great, and we're going to get into a discussion specifically around those ideas and solutions where I'll be able to take notes and jot everything down. So that's where we're going next, is the solutions. So I'll take questions on what the data mean and how to interpret them right now, and then Caroline's going to facilitate a conversation about that exact thing, Judah, and that you and Gardner were talking about in terms of solutions and different ways we could do this. So do others have questions on how to interpret the data that I've just reviewed? Paul, I see your hand is up. Is it a data question or is it a recommendation?
No, I think it can wait until Caroline starts that discussion. Okay,
great.
thanks.
I want to make sure you all are saving your ideas for when I can take notes and get them all down rather than presenting, because I'm having a hard time multitasking right now. Okay, if we don't have any additional data related questions, then we can move on to the conversation portion of this event. I'll hand it back to whoever is going to talk next.
Thanks, Gloria. So I'm very happy to see the enthusiasm, because we definitely want your ideas about solutions. But before we get to the solutions piece, I wanted to just sort of go over the challenges that we've been experiencing, and I'm happy to talk about other challenges that you may have. I mean, obviously, I think what the end game is, we all want to make sure that we're giving you, we're properly compensating you for the work that you're doing and for the tough work that you're doing. Some of those cases, knowing, understanding that some of your cases are more difficult than others. We hope that overall, like within contract groups, the complexity of your caseloads are being factored in by the administrator. For those of you that have administrators, there's some of that we expect, administrators to help with in terms of balancing out the workloads. But in terms of, the challenges that we have faced, we have long talked about, wanting a better system for how to do complex case weighting. That right now it's pretty complicated. And one of the big things, and I don't even have this on here, but right now you're sending an email to me and or Shannon, and you have to wait for us to respond on many of these that aren't on automatic. If it's a Measure 11, obviously you can track that without an email. But I mean, that's right out of the gate, it's like you're dependent upon our, us being available to respond timely, and we do our best to do that. But I don't love a system that requires you to have to wait for us to respond timely so that you can, figure out what to put in your report. As you know, the extra credit provision was originally, that's from the original general terms, and it was based on the case credit model, which is no longer in use. Significant time. This is asking for additional complexity. As I mentioned, it's a significant investment for you guys to remember to send the email, remember to track it. And then the same thing on our part. We need to respond. We need to talk about it if it's not a real simple answer. The other thing is, it's quite honestly, it's sometimes challenging to really figure out if a case that you're describing to us appears to be difficult at the outset. Sometimes, oftentimes that is the case. The trajectory of that case continues to be more challenging than the average case, but that's not always the case. And so then, sort of the question And this gets down to point number 6, which is, we can make an authorization, but how long should that authorization be good? Sometimes, attorneys are counting these cases as complex for, multiple years, and the complexity of that case, what made it complex, may no longer exist. What we're hearing, and meanwhile, what we're hearing from most of our counties, in fact, I'm not sure that there's any counties that would admit that their overall workloads are not more difficult, right? Some counties where DHS is ramping back up, they've got, they're getting their positions filled. In other counties where there's not as many petitions filed, but they're working with families in their home, but then when the petitions are filed, they're more difficult. So there's just some natural complexities that are applying to all of the cases, in which case, it feels like we want to compensate everyone for that piece. And then just, the overall concern that, we don't want this to result in those attorneys who are better at advocating for themselves and better on the business end. So remembering to send requests to us while others are just out there working hard and are like, we're just going to suck it up and do it. It's like, is there a way for us to better recognize that everyone deserves a little bit more recognition for this tough work? So those are just some of the challenges. I don't know if anyone, Paul, I see your hand up. The next slide, we're going to focus on, sort of solutions recommendations. Is there any other challenges that anyone wants to add in here? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I also want to recognize that you may also have some of your own that you want to share. Paul?
Oh, I was just my comment was, I guess, identifying that there is a problem with the disparity and identifying what those problems are, what might help guide us towards the solution.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you probably noticed in Gloria's data slides is that some counties are asking for complex case counts at a much higher rate than other counties. And so, I mean, you can see, just in the numbers, you can see there's disparities. I'm certainly not saying that the county that's requesting doesn't deserve that extra case count, but it's very likely that some of those same factors that exist in one county exist in other counties, and yet they're not getting that. The other county's not getting that because they're not asking. So I think when we get to the solutions, I think you'll see a recommended solution that helps address that. So let's go there. Shannon, if you can go to the next slide. So we talked as a team, and trust me, we've talked pretty extensively about this. We've listened to, we've read emails from providers. We've listened to you guys at other meetings. And these are 2 potential recommendations that we feel like would either one be viable. We obviously would have to follow up on both because we don't get to just make the decision to make these changes. We'd have to sort of, make a proposal to our legislature, or excuse me, to our leadership. And then, we would come back to you with what their decision was. But we certainly want your input on what the recommendation should be. We want something that's going to work for everybody. Can't just work for OPDS. It's got to work, it's really important that it work for you guys. So the first option would be if we kept most of the current complex factors that we have in place, and then, where you can, Measure 11 out of county, where you can count those automatically. You don't have to, request. You don't have to send an email to us. Trying to take the, to reduce the amount of staff time that anybody's having to spend. But then we set up an online system similar to what they've just set up for the billing system. And today's meeting is not a conversation about whether that works or not. In fact, I might be going blah, blah, blah. I hope it's working for anybody that's doing it. But again, that's a whole nother conversation. But setting up something online that does work and would allow you to make a request in a very consistent format. So it sort of takes the objectiveness out of it. It's like you'd fill out, you'd hit a few boxes that give us the information we need, and then you could sort of get an automated response. We could do that for the collateral related legal needs and as otherwise approved by OPDS. And then we'd also need to renew that approval at regular intervals. And that would deal with that whole, you don't necessarily get to claim it as complex in perpetuity because it may, the complex factor may go away at some point. So that would be the first option. I see Paul's hand up, but I don't see Paul anymore. There he is. Paul, did you still have a question, or is that?
No, my hand can be put down. I just don't know how to do that.
Okay. Well, I just will ignore you unless I see you waving. There we go. Okay, so, and then the second option would be, again, as we listen to everyone across the board talk about more difficult workloads, and we try to reduce the amount of time you're spending, we're spending, it's like, what if we did a little further analysis? Gloria, Gloria's great at that. She would help us do a little further analysis of the workload to apply an appropriate complex case factor to all caseloads, all PCRP caseloads. And would come back with a recommendation to reduce our target open caseloads to something slightly less than 80. Maybe it comes in at 77 or 78. We would still maintain, I expect that we would still maintain the out of county and Measure 11. My understanding is there's only a select group of attorneys that are taking Measure 11 cases, and we need to make sure that they are being appropriately compensated for that. And clearly the data suggests that those are more difficult cases. So, and because they're easy to identify and we don't, you don't spend any extra time justifying those, we think that category should probably stay. And the same thing with out of county. But with the exception of those two categories, we would literally build in, this would be like building in a complex factor. And this goes to what we were saying before, where with this option, it really does, it sort of applies a more equitable across the board complex factor to everyone's caseloads. And then if there's issues beyond that within your group, with, if you have one attorney who's taking all of the non-English speaking cases because they speak that language and that makes their workload more difficult, those would be issues to work out with your contract administrator. They wouldn't necessarily be things for OPDS to weigh in on. Does that make sense? What do you all think? Are there other, and do you have some of your own ideas for recommendations? Is that Gardner?
Hi, yes. So a separate recommendation, it's kind of a question. What about a situation where, you keep generally the system you have in place, but one thing that occurs is that if you have a general sense of how much time is being spent per case, whatever static, whatever particular amount of time that is, what about having a system where when people send in their timesheets and their time goes, you notice, like have something set up automatically where once time on a particular case seems to be beyond a certain percentage of, the average time. In other words, somebody's spending a lot more time on one case and it's just showing up in the data, a client's case, it's just going up. And that it triggers something where the attorney maybe is sent an email or the system itself triggers an evaluation of that to be considered for a complex case credit. In other words, it would be a way of almost like a red flag where if an attorney in, say, Columbia County is not requesting complex case credits for something, but they're spending more time on cases, and you're seeing it show up on a few cases, they should possibly be evaluating whether or not that's a case that has complexity that's translating into more hours spent on the case. Because that's my assumption, is that the complexity generally will lead to more time spent on the case. I know that's kind of black and white, but I think that's fair. So if that's true, why not add something into the system that just anytime somebody, because different counties are doing different things, and we'll always have differences in how people view how hard their work is, what's normal work versus extra complex work. One attorney in Multnomah County might think this is just normal. One attorney in another county might just think, wow, this is way beyond normal. And it just depends on the culture of that county and the individual attorneys and stuff. And that would then, of course, take into account the travel times, for example, for these folks that have to travel distances to different counties to do their work. It would trigger it. It would, you know, if they're not getting credit for it now, it would definitely show up if more time's being spent on a case. Once it's beyond a certain threshold, that it would just somehow trigger some response for either the attorney or OPDS, the folks, either side of it, to suddenly look at that and say, like, I think that might be a complex case. Is it? So that's just a thought.
Okay, thanks, Gardner. The one thing I would say to that, and I'm happy to have Gloria jump in or correct me if I'm wrong, but that system would work if we were tracking hours monthly. Like if we were tracking cases by the number of hours. We can look at hours, obviously, as you see, but it's not. We don't have a system where there's a certain requirement for the number of hours, and so something like that would require different metrics to measure something like that. Gloria, I don't know if you I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, so I think that's actually an interesting idea. What we would have to determine is like, what is the threshold that if the case goes beyond a certain number of hours, it would be flagged as being complex. So we don't have that kind of standard that would need to be developed. And the other thing is that, like, different counties and contractors report their complex cases differently, attorneys also report their hours differently. And in looking at different spreadsheets, I'm not so certain that everyone's reporting all of their hours. So maybe this would be an incentive to get attorneys to actually report all the time that they're spending on cases. But right now, it's also a bit of a problematic metric that's not consistent across attorneys and contractors and counties.
Thanks, Gloria.
I was just going to follow up on that real quick, which is, as you can imagine, before everybody on this call and elsewhere wants to murder me, I am not in any way recommending certain kind of standards for hours being uniformly adopted, you know, for cases across the state. And I'm smiling right now and saying, like, oh God, what have I done? But so I get the complexity of it. I'm just thinking, like, maybe we could just get something where the system, maybe it's not ours, but where the system recognizes stats that seem to indicate complexity. And it's hard to do under the way we're doing it now, I understand, but it's just food for thought for the future, maybe.
Certainly, and we'll note that down. I'm sure Gloria has noted it in her, and I too was chuckling, Gardner. I see you're very good at reading body language. So I'm just gonna go down my list of who I show with hands up. So Kyler, you're next, and then Melissa.
Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, I've had my video off because it's freezing in my room, so I'm wearing a Snuggie when my video is off. I was wondering the regular intervals, what kind of timing that was going to be. I can imagine if I was thinking like every month or every 6 months or something.
Yeah, certainly not monthly. We talk, you know, quarterly, every 6 months. We can certainly, again, you know, we would definitely want your guys' input on that, coming up with that, what measurement that should be.
And then the only other thing I had was, and similarly, I don't know if this just makes things worse, but I'm thinking of at least one of my cases that I've worked with Shannon on that, you know, the complex case weighting being either one case or 1 credit or for 2 credits. There are some that honestly feel like they could be up to 3 credits just for the complexity. And that's why I'm wondering if it is based on, as Gardner was saying, the amount of time, if there was some way to measure that there are genuinely some cases that take 3 times the amount of work as some of the standard 1 case credits. So I have absolutely no suggestions of how to remedy that, but just thinking about when thinking about complex cases, that there are some that just would look like that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Kyler. And one of the things that I have had conversations, and this goes back to my comment about working with your administrators, because I've certainly talked with contract administrators who say, we take that into account when we assign cases amongst our lawyers. If we have, as long as you're communicating with your administrator, and what it may mean is that internally you get less cases for a bit to reflect that factor. But it doesn't necessarily translate. I mean, if we went with a recommendation that was really looking at more recognizing everyone for the fact that their caseloads are a little bit more difficult. And we expect that that's going to account for the majority of these situations. There's always going to be some individual situations where, where somebody's just crushed by a case. And then that's where we would expect you to go, talk with your contract administrator. But again, I'm happy to have, others weigh in on that as well. Melissa.
So I think, though, that if you have, just to start where you left off, if you have a contract administrator assigning cases, based on complexity and giving people fewer cases for more complex cases, then you're still going to have a disparity statewide because OPDS is going to be seeing fewer cases, right? So even if it's a complex case and attorney X gets it instead of attorney Y, overall, you still have a fewer number of cases. And when OPDS is looking at your open case total or your quota, however OPDS chooses to, refer to it at the time, that's still going to be reflected differently than in a county where they're seeking complex case credit. So I think it should be there should be a uniform standard, whether it's the administrator assigning it or OPDS assigning complex case credit so that it's clear. The other thing that I was just going to say is when you're talking about reducing the target open caseload slightly less, if the feedback is that overall cases like around the state that are open and being filed are more complex in general, should there be consideration given to reducing what constitutes an FTE, like what the total number of cases is? Because, anecdotally, that 80 cases was developed, based on a different state's model prior to 2014 when our county was a pilot. This is now 2022, and we're still at 80 cases constituting an FTE. And I know, based on my caseloads, that 80 cases in 2014 was markedly different than 80 cases in 2022. And a lot of that has to do with case law and the changes in the case law that changes practice within DHS and what they file on and what they don't. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of highlight that. And while two cases or three cases can make a difference, I don't think that reducing a caseload by 2 or 3 cases to account for all complex cases would be much of a difference for people. That's just my personal take.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Yeah, and like I said, Gloria will, she'll run the numbers. I completely understand what you're saying about the FTE. We've also had those conversations. Right now, what we're talking about is simply, it's going to be much easier for us to justify to our leadership, budget manager, if there's really no overall difference in what we're paying. Clearly, if we suddenly reduce the FTE to 70 cases, that's going to cost us a lot more. In this situation, this first step is really just saying, hey, we're already giving extra case counts. So we're already paying for this, but it's not being applied across the board. And so we want to make this change just to apply the complex factor across the board. And we don't know yet. Could be more than 2 or 3 cases. I just, we don't know, but we will certainly do that analysis if that's.
Can I make a suggestion about when you look at that? Because sure. I know that just from doing these meetings that we've done, like I've become more aware of the types of cases for which people seek complex case credit. And based on that, attorneys in our group are like, what? We could have been getting complex case credit or complex case assignment for that. And so I think that at least checking with administrators about that, because I think I see other people nodding. I think a lot of us probably didn't know that that was available for some of the things that people are actually getting complex case weighting for. So the numbers might actually be much higher, which would then impact, I would think, the number of cases that you would, I guess, reduce the FTE by or something. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, Gloria.
Yes, it does make sense to me, Gloria. If you're following too what she's saying.
Yeah, I understand. And I'm making notes on everything, so thanks for describing it.
Okay. Let's see here. So I think Paula, you were next, and then Alan.
Oh, okay, thanks. I actually had my own comment, but I wanted to add something to what Melissa just said. Was as I recall, the 80 number was based on it's Washington State, and it was all dependency cases. And so one of the differences that's always been between Oregon and Washington is that we also have the delinquency cases, which is kind of a different animal in terms of weighting it. So just when you're taking notes on whether or not that's something that we want to pursue at some point, that's a difference between us and Washington. But my comment had to do with when different practitioners have different personalities as far as willingness to do the paperwork. And when you think about doing NREs and things like that, you do this paperwork in order to get the complex credit. I've in particular enjoy when you're talking about recommendations, number 1 versus number 2, that you have more on the list that are specifically recognized as cases that have more work. And the only one on the list that I think is something that I might change and would be the one that says 3 felonies, because 3 felonies sometimes can be a crap load of work, but sometimes 3 felonies are just simply your client got 3 different petitions with 3 different burglaries, and it's not necessarily like a more complex case. So I'm just questioning that even being on the list and not being something that people might want to just make a pitch for in terms of being a complex case. The other thing is on the measure 11, I would add to that / sex cases, because sometimes you can have sex cases are always more work, but you could have non-measure 11 sex cases. And so in terms of being kind of an automatic complex credit, I would suggest that. And as I said, just in terms of practitioners and personalities, I just would like to submit that fewer NRE or form type requirements, so that people don't have to do those, is better, I think, for the people on the street than having to ask for a complex credit for everything other than out of county or measure 11. So those would be my suggestions.
Thanks, Paula. With regard, I'm glad you brought up the 3 or more felony petitions. We do plan, and I think, again, I don't know how well we had communicated this, but that was essentially one of those that we sort of mistakenly didn't take out of the updated guidance in January of this year. Because now that you can count them all as separate cases based on case number, there was really no reason to leave that in. And as you can see from Gloria's data analysis, those shouldn't be in there. So yeah, those are going to come out. I should have clarified that. Alan, you're next, and then Warren.
Thank you. Almost forgot what I was going to say at this point. However, I will go back to the sex cases. That even applies with dependency cases. I have one I just got about a month ago that is every bit as complicated as defending a sex case with a lower standard of proof. I mean, we're, for the state. So I think that perhaps having that in a dependency environment as well would be a good thing, or something to think about anyway. I'm always amazed at the diversity of how we do business across the state. I mean, I do not assign cases. I mean, each month I put together a call list, which is the order of pre-agreed upon. Number 1 on the list gets the child, number 2 gets the mom, number 3 gets the dad, number 4 gets the extra dad. Number 5 is the fallback person. And then we also do conflict for Benton County. And our number 1 person is also the first person to call if one of the Benton County lawyers can't take a case. So we don't really have that kind of control. And a lot of the complexity doesn't appear until after the case has been taken and you start to do the work on it. Once in a while, we'll get red flags. But I think that the way of doing complexity in our world anyway is all of our practitioners contact you directly and put their case together. And I have been encouraging them to do it. And me or my assistant will help them with the wording if they have to. But I think being able to write that up and send it in is not that strenuous. It's just an email, which I think is something we need to at least keep as an option, no matter where we go moving forward.
Thanks, Ellen. I appreciate that. And yeah, just so I'm clear, in terms of the administrator's involvement, I'm not aware of any administrator who is routinely looking at complexities from the outset. I don't know how you would do that, just like you say. I'm talking about I'm talking about an individual attorney in a firm that's got a case they feel like is taking double of their normal caseload, and they don't feel like they can pick up the next shelter hearing. Those are the kinds of things I would expect to be dealt with at the contract level. We're talking one-offs. I'm not talking any kind of regular rotation. So I just want to make sure that you all know that OPDS is not the only one that can have any input on decisions for your caseloads, obviously. And Alan, I appreciate, individually it probably doesn't take lawyers much time to send an email, but as you can imagine, as we continue to expand, what it does is it makes for a lot more work for Shannon and I. And, I used to be able to keep up with requests really, really well. And I have to be honest with, 100 plus lawyers, it's much more difficult now, because, obviously I'm not getting those emails all at once, but getting a very steady diet of them. And I don't like the fact that I can't respond as quickly as I like to. And I know Shannon feels the same. When I have to get a reminder because it's been lost in my email box, that is not a good feeling. And it's when it gets to that where I feel like we've got to come up with a better solution that still works for all of us, right? Because the solution is not, let's just do away with complex and then that makes our life easier. That is not what we're saying here.
I think what I'm saying is that if you can come up with some basic sets of circumstances that automatically becomes complex, then that would relieve you of a lot of work too. And I'm saying just make sure we can leave that as an option. I appreciate you being swamped with a bunch of, and I know some of my colleagues can put together a 2-page email without much of an effort. So, having small books to read on a regular basis doesn't help your life either. I get that.
Right. So if I'm understanding you, Alan, are you looking at more at like the first option where you set up an automated type system?
I think that would be the most effective, to at least have, try to figure a way to get even half of these as just automatic complexity. Then that would relieve a lot of pressure on you, especially and Salem, to address the new ones if we can get at least some things that are automatic.
Okay, so we are down to less than 10 minutes left in our meeting, and I know Warren's had his hand up, so I want to get through everybody that had a question initially, but then I would like to, and Gloria, I may call on you to sort of remind me if we have other recommendations. I know we've talked, there's been lots of conversation, but to remind me what we have in the way of actual recommendations that differ from the 2 that we have here. So Warren.
Just for historical reference, by the summer of 2008, 2 states, Massachusetts and Washington, had done studies that said about 75 to 80 cases is a full load for juvenile dependency. I don't know what the system was in Massachusetts, but that's what OPDS director, I was having that conversation with her at the time. After that, 2 more states did studies. I don't remember which states they were before this PCRP got instituted here in response to, I think, 4 states, and they may have all had somewhat different systems. I totally agree that sex cases take more time, usually, unless a person who's accused of that in a dependency case simply says, well, I'm backing away, I'm disappearing. otherwise, yeah, they do take more time. Also, every now and then we get a client who consumes phenomenal amounts of time, either due to their disability or due to their personality disorder. I had one last year, I think it was, that sent me 500 emails, single spaced, without paragraph breaks or punctuation in the space of 5 months. If we pull out the DSM-5 and diagnose our own client with narcissistic personality disorder, can we get a complex case credit for that? Under the old model, we did a lot of averaging. I guess one of the challenges for OPDS now is to figure out what the real average is. One of these heavy cases could be balanced by half a dozen cases where you do nothing for 6 months. So, yeah, I guess that's a challenge for administration statewide to figure out where that average point actually is.
Thanks, Warren. That's a really good point. And we have had those conversations internally, right? I mean, obviously, we never expect you guys to come back and say, hey, that case, the last case we took, you know, was dismissed really quickly and we didn't end up having to do anything on it. I mean, we know that your regular workloads are going to we have to factor in some of that. You know, we know obviously at this point, not every lawyer is asking for complex case credit for, you know, for every difficult case. Everyone's going to have difficult clients, right? That's an assumption as part of your regular load. So yes, those points are well taken. Paulo, is your hand still up or did you have another question?
Sorry, I actually did. I forgot to say one thing, was that I had an idea about how to go back and kind of review whether or not something was still complex. And I was thinking on our sheet that has our, you know, our case numbers on it, and we have the different columns. There could be a column that's a, you know, 90-day review, you know, case still requires complex, you know, case consideration, and then the practitioner could just, you know, cross that one way or another, respond to that one way or another on that column, and it could make that review easy.
Okay, thanks. So I just got my 5-minute reminder that our meeting is going to be up in 5 minutes. So I really want to come back to our list here, and then Gloria, can you share? I mean, I know we've heard a few things. I have not been keeping notes, so I want to make sure I didn't miss anything in terms of any recommendations.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of recommendations, so I'm not actually sure if I can totally summarize everything, but we've had a couple people talk about some sort of sliding scale to account for cases that are twice the work, 3 times the work, or maybe half the work. So rather than just having complex cases be counted as 2, have the complex case count really be according to the amount of work. We had the idea of having complex cases be based on the amount of time an attorney is putting into a case. So having a system that would flag cases that are going beyond the typical hours expected for a case and have those considered to be complex. There is a lot of talk about OPDS needing to evaluate if the 80 workload makes sense for the current climate, and you know, that was what, like 8 years ago, so does it make sense to still use 80 as the standard? And talk about expanding our list of current complex case categories to include sex offense cases for both delinquency and dependency. So, I mean, I think we can all tell just by me rambling on that there are a lot of additional ideas. So it might make sense for us to kind of compile all of these and send them back out to everyone for review.
So yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, given the time constraints and the fact that you guys had some great suggestions. we can do similar to what we did with our pre-petition conversation. We can go back, compile our notes, and try to make a full list of the recommendations. Some of them, to me, it sounds like some of the pieces that came up might fit together. So we may not be talking about 7 different recommendations. It may be more like 4 or 5. So we'll do the work to sort of compile that list and get that out in advance of the February 15th meeting. I do want to spend the bulk of the February meeting talking about the case manager role, because that's our last primary topic for this initial meeting of the advisory group. So if there, let's see, how do I want to say this? I know we can't engage in dialogue around this outside this meeting, but come prepared to essentially, vote on a recommendation at the next meeting, I guess is what I'm saying. And we can spend a few minutes talking about it if there's pieces that need to be fleshed out. But I was hoping to, again, either, come away with a recommendation today, which is not going to happen, but try to at least get all of the conversation out in today's meeting. Real quickly, Paula, and then Melissa. Paula, are you there?
No, sorry. I didn't put my hand down after the last time. I don't have something to.
Okay, great. Melissa?
Is it possible to get what we'd be voting on, like in advance, like sufficiently in advance, so we could talk with other people within our consortium or entities so that we can, have additional feedback about that?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's obviously always our intent. We don't always have actual materials beyond just an agenda, but this would be, send the agenda out a week in advance with the whole list of what we've come up with from our meeting. And again, when we get together on the 15th, I mean, if we have misrepresented something, I guess my point is I don't want to spend much time on new conversation. I want to focus on what's in the, taking what we've heard today, put it in a listing, and then on the 15th being prepared to essentially rank those or vote on them. Does that make sense? If we have questions in the meantime about something that was said by an individual, we can reach out to you for clarification to make sure, because we want a clear, comprehensive list of what we heard from you. Paul.
That sounds good, but my suggestion is that we allocate a little bit more time to that February meeting if you also want to address the case manager issue and deal with this, because just an hour just flies by.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to entertain that. The other option was we can set another meeting. It doesn't mean that we can't.
I would prefer another meeting on this issue, because I just think there's so much there, and so many things we are starting to talk about and flush out. So that would be just my preference, just as a separate meeting about this.
Good to know. Thanks. Okay. Anything else? We definitely have exceeded our hour. I appreciate your guys' time. Your feedback's always helpful. I really appreciate you taking the hour out of your day to be here with us. Anything else? Paula, your hand.
Hey, you're breaking up, Caroline, but I don't have any additional points, so we can adjourn.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll see you soon.
Happy New Year.
Thanks. Have a great day, you guys.
You too.
Bye.